morning. I'm Jisoo Kim, Director of the GW Institute for Korean Studies and Korea Foundation Associate Professor of History, International Affairs, and East Asian Languages and Literatures. It is my great pleasure to welcome you all to the 5th Annual North Korea Economic Forum. It's already 5th year, which is about the correlation between North Korea's economic and foreign policy. Thanks for joining us virtually this morning. I would like to begin thanking our distinguished speakers, Dean Alyssa Ayers, Dean Jong-il Yu, keynote speaker Sydney Saylor, and our NKEF chair, Bill Brown, and of course our presenters, discussants, and moderators for joining this year's forum. Without them, we could not have hosted today's conference, and my special thanks also goes to our NKEF steering committee, Bill Brown, Bill Newcomb, Troy Stangaron, Rachel Lee, and Yeonho Kim for helping with the theme of this year's forum. We could not have prepared the 5th forum without our sponsor, and I would like to thank the KDI School of Public Policy and Management for their generous support. Finally, but not least, we could not have prepared our events with our staff. I would like to especially thank Program Manager Sean Dolan for his hard work coordinating the forum. Now, I would like to introduce our distinguished speakers to give their congratulatory remarks. I would like to first introduce Dean Ayers, Dean Alyssa Ayers of the eludes School of International Affairs at George Washington University. She's a foreign policy practitioner and award-winning author with senior experience in the government, nonprofit, and private sectors. From 2013 to 2020, she was a senior fellow for India, Pakistan, and South Asia at the Council on Foreign Relations, where she remains an adjunct senior fellow. Her work focuses primarily on India's role in the world and on U.S. relations with, South Asia in the larger Indo-Pacific. From 2010 to 2013, Dean Ayers served as Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for South Asia. She received an AB from Harvard College and an MA and PhD from the University of Chicago. Well, Dean Ayers, unfortunately, she's currently traveling, so she's not virtually here with us, but she sent us a video to deliver her remarks. But to our audience, I would like to let you know that her voice is a bit low, and so please turn on your volume to listen to her remarks. Thank you.
Good morning, or good evening for some of you joining virtually. My name is Alyssa Ayers, and I'm Dean of the GW Elliott School of International Affairs, and I'm delighted to welcome you to the 2023 North Korea Economic Forum. I'm just sorry not to be able to join you in person today. Since launched in 2019, the North Korea Economic Forum at GW has been recognized by the North Korea Watchers in Washington and beyond as a center for knowledge sharing and network building, both private and public, on the North Korean economy. The forum's annual conference has been providing a unique opportunity to understand the North Korean economy in a holistic way. This year, we will delve into the correlation between North Korea's economic and foreign policies. The two-day conference will cover North Korea's science and technology policy, trademarks, cryptocurrency theft, and the semiconductor industry. Especially in the policy field, Korean Studies in Washington, D.C. helps to educate future policy circle elites who will develop their careers in the government, academia, think tanks, media, non-governmental organizations, and other pathways. We believe it essential that here in the nation's capital, in cooperation with leading experts, that we provide the Washington audience with deep and diverse perspectives about the Korean Peninsula. I would like to thank the KDI School of Public Policy and Management, co-sponsor of the conference, for providing a generous grant to the George Washington University Institute for Korean Studies that has enabled a series of meaningful Korea-related policy events, as well as scholarships and stipends for GW students studying Korea and policy issues. Now, I know KDIS Dean Jong-il Yu will offer congratulatory remarks shortly, so I just want to reiterate how much we value this partnership, and we look forward to continued cooperation between GW and the KDI School, including ongoing exchanges to broaden our ties. With that, let me thank everyone for your efforts and congratulate the GW Institute for Korean Studies and the KDI School on this next North Korean Economic Forum.
All right, thanks, Dean Ayers. Now let me introduce Dean Jong-il Yu. Dr. Jong-il Yu is the Dean of KDI School of Public Policy and Management. Before taking a professorship at the KDI School of Public Policy and Management, Dean Yu taught at the University of Cambridge, the University of Notre Dame, and Ritsumeikan University. He also had visiting professor positions at the University of California, San Diego, and the University of Beijing. Dean Yu is widely published in such areas as economic growth and income distribution, macroeconomic and development policies, and labor issues. He has been active as a policy advisor and served as a member of the Presidential Committee on Northeast Asia Economic Hub and chaired the Special Committee on Economic Democracy on the Democratic Party. He also served as a member of the Public Funds Management Committee, the Advisory Committee for the Constitutional Revision Committee of the National Assembly, and the Commission on Financial Administration Reform. Dean Yu graduated from Seoul National University and received his PhD in economics from Harvard University. Dean Yu also sent us a video from Korea to deliver his congratulatory remarks.
Dr. Alyssa Ayers, Dean of the Elliott School, Mr. William Brown, Chair of the North Korea Economic Forum, Mr. Sidney Saylor, former National Intelligence Officer of North Korea, Dr. Jisoo Kim, Director of the Institute for Korean Studies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning and good evening from Korea. It's my great honor to co-host this year's North Korea Economic Forum annual conference. On behalf of KDI School of Public Policy and Management, I'd like to extend a warm welcome and deep gratitude to all the speakers and participants. We at KDI School are delighted to collaborate with our partners from the George Washington Institute for Korean Studies in bringing together a wonderful mix of experts who share a deep interest in North Korea. Allow me to take this opportunity to express my deepest thanks to GWIX for organizing this conference, as well as for being a great partner for many years. The North Korea Economic Forum is a flagship program of the cooperation project between KDI School and GWIX. Over the years, the forum's annual conference has tackled a wide array of issues concerning North Korea and examined the role of institutions, markets, and external actors in shaping North Korea's current affairs, policies, and their outcomes. The theme of this year's conference, the correlation between North Korea's economic and foreign policy, is particularly timely. As the liberal international order is crumbling, geopolitics and geoeconomics are playing more salient roles in shaping national policies around the world. The connection between economic policy and foreign policy has been especially strong in North Korea, it seems to me, as it has never been a part of the liberal international order. The recent news that North Korea shipped military equipment and munitions to Russia for use in Ukraine in exchange for cash and fuel is a case in point. The way North Korea balances its economic needs and foreign policy goals, I'm sure, has significant implications for regional stability as well as international cooperation. I hope to learn from this conference about how to decipher the complex puzzle of North Korea's foreign policy. Once again, a very warm welcome to all our speakers and participants. I look forward to the insightful presentations and stimulating discussions that will unfold today and tomorrow. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Dean Yu. Next, our next distinguished speaker is Bill Brown, who is currently the chair of the North Korea Economic Forum at GWIX. He is also principal of his consulting company, Northeast Asia Economics and Intelligence Advisory, and is adjunct professor at Georgetown University School of Foreign Service, where he teaches courses on the Chinese, Japanese, and Korean economics. Mr. Brown served a career in the federal government working as an economist and East Asia specialist at the Central Intelligence Agency, Commerce Department, and National Intelligence Council. At the NIC, he served as Senior Research Fellow for East Asia and as Deputy National Intelligence Officer for Economics. His most recent service was as Senior Advisor to the National Intelligence Manager for East Asia in the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. Mr. Brown's research is focused on the North Korean and Chinese economies, and he's widely quoted in national and Korean media, especially with Voice of America. His publications include Money and Markets in North Korea, an unclassified study for the National Intelligence Council, and the Economics of Korean Unification, published by the Council on Foreign Relations. Bill, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thanks a lot, Jisoo. And just a few comments here on our conference as we get started. This year, we're doing it a little bit differently with an interview or a strongly moderated format that we think will be both informative and entertaining. There should be plenty of time for you to participate as well with your questions in the little chat box down there. You can be sure that our expert moderators on our team, especially the leads for today, Rachel Lee from 38 North and the Open Nuclear Network in Vienna, Austria, not Virginia, and tomorrow, Troy Stangerlov from Korea Economic Institute, Bill Newcomb and others have all carefully digested these excellent papers and are in great positions to ask penetrating questions. And the expert researchers themselves have done a great job with their work. None of this is easy, we all know that, and it's always fine to say we simply don't know yet. The objective is to link North Korea's economic engagement policies to its overarching foreign policy. It really isn't quite the hermit kingdom I often say that it is. Now, tomorrow morning at 9 Eastern Daylight Time, we have a special guest, Sid Seiler, one of the most knowledgeable Americans you will ever find on North Korea. He just retired from a long career in our government devoted to work on North Korea. And most recently as the NIO, National Intelligence Officer for the Koreas. And since he just retired, he's able to speak his mind a little bit on these issues. I'll try to be just a little bit provocative with my old friend and colleague. Come to the Elliott School Linder Conference Room if you can to participate in person. Otherwise, it'll be on this link. The papers are the real work of this conference and will be published, I think, early next year, after undergoing a little bit more peer review, some of which is happening as we listen. Here's last year's publication. It might be backwards, I don't know. You know, I can't get it to the right way. It's a really great piece of work, edited by Yun-Ho Kim here at GWIX, and published with the help of KDI. I want to especially thank Yun-Ho and Sean Dolan, also of GWIX, and moderators Rachel and Troy and all of our team on this largely voluntary forum who've made this possible. Now, Rachel Lee is going to moderate the session today. She's a true expert, really, on North Korean publications. So Rachel, I'll turn it over to you for this morning's session.
Good morning, afternoon, or evening to you all, depending on where you are, and happy Halloween. I will be moderating the first panel on the correlation between North Korea's economic and science and technology policy and North Korea's foreign policy. I have the honor of introducing two speakers and two discussants in the order of their appearance. First, we have Dr. Soo-Hyun Chung, Associate Professor in the Department of Ethics, Education at Gongju National University. Dr. Chung specializes in teaching courses on inter-Korean relations, North Korea's political economy, international relations, and peace education. Next, we have Dr. Pyongyang Kim, Distinguished Professor in the Department of Economics and the Director for the Institute for Future Strategy at Seoul National University. His research interests include transition economics, in particular with reference to North Korea and former socialist countries. Next, we have Dr. Bernard Zeliger, who is resident representative of the Hans Seidel Foundation in Korea, based in Seoul. He has worked on sustainable development issues in the inter-Korean border area for over 15 years and has led multiple environmental projects concerning North Korea. Last but not least, we have Mr. Yun-Ho Kim, who is an Associate Research Professor of Practice and Associate Director of George Washington Institute for Korean Studies. Mr. Kim specializes in North Korea's mobile telecommunications and U.S. policy toward North Korea. As Bill briefly mentioned, we are trying a new format this year where each speaker and discussant will present their paper and comments in a Q&A format with a moderator. We will hopefully have about 20 minutes at the end of this session for audience questions. Feel free to add your questions in the Q&A box throughout the session. So we will kick off the session with a Q&A session with Dr. Zhang on her paper, followed by a Q&A with Dr. Pyongyang Kim, who will comment on Dr. Zhang's paper. Dr. Chung, I will turn over to you now. You wrote a very interesting paper entitled Kim Jong-un's People First Principle, Exploring the Nexus of North Korea's Domestic and Foreign Policy. Can you explain in 3 minutes what People First Principle means and how this policy has shaped North Korea's domestic and foreign policy choices?
I'm honored to have joined the 5th annual North Korea Economic Forum today, held by GWIX. And preparing the paper for this forum was a very pleasant experience for me, and working with so many people and receiving immense support from the organizer. So I will start with the main theme of my paper, which is Kim Jong-un's People First Principle, PFP. So the PFP is best encapsulated by the North Korean slogan. They're saying everything for the people and everything by relying on them. And it promotes a narrative that transforms the people from the mere subject of socialism to the subject of material wealth and national prestige. So it kind of suits the basis of Kim Jong-un, so Kim Jong-un's legitimacy, and he places greater emphasis on the economic performance and diplomatic competence. So that is basically PFP, and then my paper looked into PFP as a background where Kim Jong-un promotes and Kim Jong-un conducts his economic policy and foreign policy, and I look at mainly the correlation between them.
Okay. Thank you for that. So in your paper, I wanted to ask you about one of the goals of the People First Principle, which, as you mentioned in your paper, is to improve the economy and raise the people's living standards. So if that is the case, is the People First Principle still valid in North Korea's economic policy, particularly given North Korea's moves toward greater centralization of the economy after the collapse of the Hanoi summit in 2019?
Yeah, I believe PFP is still valid. As I explained, firstly, it started as a slogan suggested by Kim Jong-un, but lately it became more or less a principle of leading his country. So even after Hanoi summit, or even the continued sanction, even the economic difficulty due to prolonged sanction, I believe PFP still is valid in leading, in guiding North Korea under Kim Jong-un regime.
If I may press you on that a little bit, Dr. Chung. So if the main idea of Kim Jong-un's People First Principle is for the welfare of the people, for the well-being of the people, as North Korean propaganda states. But yet, after the collapse of the Hanoi summit in 2019, we started to see North Korea making various moves to assert greater control over the central economy, central control over the economy. And we saw that that tendency being reinforced after the border closures in early 2020. So then I guess that's where my question about the validity of the People First Principle comes in. Do you, in the light of those developments, do you think that then might we say that the People First Principle is merely propaganda, or do you actually think that that has had an impact on North Korea's foreign policy and economic policy?
Actually, in my article, I present this PFP as a form of populism, kind of populism, like actually nowadays, many countries, has this problem or phenomenon of populism, and many politicians are populist, we can call them. And then I analyzed the PFP based on the populism criteria, how the kind of so how we can see the populism inside the PFP. And then I analyzed the PFP mainly in economic term and in foreign affairs, diplomatic term and foreign policy term. And then, so for me, in my paper, I presented that PFP is not only a propaganda for making better the economy for the people, but it can go very further, like it can be linked to, for example, crackdown on corruption by bureaucracy during Kim Jong-un period. And also it can be a basis of performance legitimacy. I mean, so Kim Jong-un basically needs to find a new source of legitimacy, and then he is finding it in better economic conditions, which is different from Kim Jong-il or Kim Il-sung, I think. So in terms of so PFP is also, a form of legitimacy during Kim Jong-un period. And if you see PFP from foreign policy use, you can see PFP is also a basis of enhancing national prestige by having nuclear weapons and building nuclear weapon country, and also PFP is also used by Kim Jong-un for negotiating and negotiating with other country and reaching out to other country, and they're showing how great North Korea is to his own people while negotiating with other countries' leaders. So actually, I'm seeing PFP rather in a broader term, not only seeing it as narrowly a propaganda focusing on economic, economy only.
Thank you for that explanation, Dr. Chung. So that's a nice segue into some of the things that you mentioned towards the end of your comments, are a nice segue into my next question, which is, while explaining how Pyongyang has used the People First principle to advance its foreign policy agenda, you posit that Kim has used the collective will of the people to give further legitimacy to its nuclear policy and increase leverage in its negotiations with the US. Can you elaborate on that? And the reason I ask is, I thought that was an interesting point of view because the general assessment among North Korea watchers is that the average North Korean's view or collective will of the people does not really have an impact on North Korea's decision or policy making.
What I emphasize is that we're still doubting whether, I think we're still in a stage we doubt whether there is a collective will. There can be a collective will of people which can restrain Kim Jong-un's power or even influence Kim Jong-un. But what I emphasize in my article is that Kim Jong-un made himself to be influenced by people, by exposing himself and by making his legitimacy basis based on people's will. It was his choice from the beginning. That's what I emphasized in my article. So it's not, I'm not saying that there is a collective will of people, the kind of things, existing willing to constrain Kim Jong-un's move, but rather Kim Jong-un, by calling PFP and people's will, so he kind of made, he was the person who made a deep link between his economic performance or diplomatic performance with PFP, and then how people view, how people appreciate his performance,
My next question was going to be, in your paper, you explained the correlation between North Korea's economic and foreign policy. How do you see North Korea's current foreign policy and foreign policy trends for the foreseeable future shaping its economic policy? Conversely, is it possible that North Korea's intent with regard to economic policy may shape North Korea's foreign policy?
So after Hanoi no deal, we see that there wasn't any meaningful negotiation between North Korea and the US or South Korea. So what we are seeing is rather, for example, North Korea approaching China or Russia recently. So after Hanoi summit, I think Scott Snyder also mentioned it in his new book. So Kim Jong-un was very much ashamed, and kind of very shameful. We also very kind of shameful moment of Kim Jong-un coming back to his country with with empty hands and then no result. What I wanted to emphasize is that Kim Jong-un kind of shifted his national policy and made it public. Meaning in front of elite and general public altogether. And then he met Trump twice, but there was no tangible result coming out from Hanoi summit. So what he did was he explained to his people why the Hanoi summit had to fail. He had to do it in public. He chose to do it in public, and then after, as we all see, there was COVID-19 and prolonged sanction, and then North Korea's economic policy went back to self-reliant theme, and I think so. But what North Korean media after propagandize is that even though U.S. North Korea summit failed, North Korea succeeded in restoring the relations with China and Russia during 2018 and 2019 through rounds of summit. So nowadays, so North Korean authorities emphasize a lot, and give a lot of importance North Korea's friendly and more close relations with Russia and China as well. So that is also, of course, approaching Russia, China, there should be economic factor behind as well. I think North Korea is gaining something from Russia and China also. And also in foreign policy term, it can show that Kim Jong-un is still doing something and doing, in front of people. So he can still show that, he's still doing good, in foreign policy terms.
Thank you for your comments, Dr. Chung. I think maybe our discussant, Dr. Pyongyang Kim, might have some questions and comments on your paper as well. So I will now turn to Professor Pyongyang Kim to maybe provide his input or thoughts on Dr. Chung's paper. Dr. Kim, I'll now turn over to you. Could you explain in about 2 minutes your key takeaways from Dr. Chung's paper?
Thank you so much. I have read Professor Chung's paper with great interest. This paper, I think it's a very interesting attempt to link foreign policy with economic policy But populism is behind these two policies. That is first key takeaway. This is very interesting and worth an attempt because we tend to separate foreign policy from economic policy. These two policies are decided, by different people. Therefore, we do not try to link these two policies. In that way, I think we had some difficult understanding North Korea as a whole, but this paper is a good attempt, therefore. Okay, the second point is that populism is succeeded somehow until 2018. I believe so, because if you look at North Korea's reforms and economic sector, there were some reforms in agriculture and enterprise. And generally, that shows Kim Jong-un's sort of caring for people's welfare. That can be called populism. And also, when Kim Jong-un came to Hanoi, he said, I came here in spite of internal oppositions. We don't know who opposed Kim Jong-un's coming to Hanoi. Maybe he associates this internal opposition with the elites. Okay, then he care for people in spite of elites' oppositions. That is in line with the sort of populism. Okay, and so foreign policy, economic policy are somehow affected by his populism. A second point is that I had to find interesting point is that North Korea uses populism in foreign policy, which tied the hands at negotiations at Hanoi, and that failed, unfortunately. But basically, this populism tried to satisfy the people's expectation, and so there's very little room to say give in, yield. Okay, therefore it failed. But the trouble, perhaps in me, I will tell it later, is the dynamics between these two policies shifted from being virtuous until 2018 to being vicious after Hanoi. Right, that is, I think, a key takeaway, but I will have some kind of question later. The last one is, I think, is prediction about the future. Because this kind of populism behind foreign policy and economic policy, gradual denuclearization, which would expect, would be difficult. That is the author's prediction. So key takeaways, okay, is I can summarize in these 4 points. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Dr. Kim. If I may go back to your comment about a virtuous cycle until 2018 and then a vicious cycle after the collapse of the Hanoi summit in 2019. This is the same question that I asked Dr. Chung earlier, and I would ask you the same now. How did we see Kim's people first principle affecting North Korea's economic and foreign policy after the collapse of the Hanoi summit in 2019? In your point of view?
Yeah, that is a bit troubling because for me, it is difficult to find, people first principle after the failure of Hanoi. Normally, this kind of populism is to improve the welfare of population. But what they observe after 2019 is, you mentioned, the restoration of the state control of the economy, hurting the welfare population. And so I wonder whether there is any people first principle not improving, but undermining the welfare of the people. Of course, the paper tried to explain this as kind of, a vicious circle. But anyway, the circle is 2 policies are interconnected in a way, hurting each other. Okay, that point is understandable. But my question is, why not Kim Jong-un intervene, okay, in this kind of interconnections, which in bad ways? For example, if really is populist, then why not abandon nuclear weapons to improve welfare population? that is more aligned with kind of populism. Okay, so I have some difficult understanding how this kind of populism or people first principle is continue to operate after 2019. I have some difficulty to understand that.
Dr. Chung, Dr. Kim, I have one more question for you, but before we go on to that one, I'd like to turn to Dr. Chung and ask if she might have a response to Dr. Kim's comment about post-Hanoi 2019.
Answering a little bit to his questions, and I think Rachel also raised similar questions previously. So if I let me explain a little bit more vicious circle. So after Hanoi 2019, Kim Jong-un's attempt, I think his attempt was very bold and then how to say audacious. But it failed anyway. So to make it up anyway, he emphasized a lot light industry and construction. You all know that there are many construction work going on. It all focuses on people's welfare, people's bettering people's lives, and then so even though economy itself is difficult, we all know it should be more difficult, under COVID-19, and then restrained trade with other countries. But still, why I mentioned the commodity exhibition of Pyongyang department store #1 in the later part of my article, to show that still there is something going on, even though North Korea's economy is not not working very well, and then they reconcentrated the power, to authority rather, but still, Kim Jong-un is different from Kim Jong-il, for example. Kim Jong-il kind of, when faced with difficulty, Kim Jong-il sometimes, walk away from market economy, but Kim Jong-un never did. Kim Jong-un still, never walked away from, for example, socialist enterprises responsibility system, for example, or so his line is still same, and he emphasized light industry construction to make it make up the failed Hanoi summit result. That is kind of my interpretation, how PFP is still going on even after Hanoi summit, but it's not working very well. But this is called vicious circle. But still, PFP is ongoing. That is my argument. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Chung. Dr. Kim, did you have a response to to Dr. Chung's response?
Yes, I think if a real populist, then perhaps he can intervene this kind of vicious circle to make it virtuous circle, or anyway, how to improve the welfare population. If his goal, he can do something. So he did something you mentioned, but these are very minor. Economic crisis is there. Therefore, I wonder whether he's really a real populist, if I see what he did after 2019. Also, is the populism in authoritarian regime is a very interesting concept. But normally it requires kind of enemy, okay? Its enemy could be elites, most cases elites. Until 2018, yes, he mentioned, the elites, people first principle. Also, he purged, many elites people. But after 2019, who are the elites? Are they be viewed as enemies of the people? That which I don't see. Therefore, whether this kind of concept is really valid for understanding North Korea. Also, what I am puzzling is that all kind of concepts to understand the regime should be parsimonious. maybe populism is one way to make it understandable, but the other way is that simply dictator requires two instruments to maintain power. One is economy, another one military power. And foreign policy is a subset of military power. And in this paper, perhaps one should add military policy, because it dictates foreign policy. So if he wants to make it the real populist, okay, he wants to present himself as a real populist, then military policy such as developing nuclear weapons can be abandoned. Then foreign policy and economic policy can be real aligned. But why didn't do it? That means he may be not real populist, but basically he cares for his power. That's maybe more parsimonious explanation what happened until now.
Thank you, Professor Kim. Dr. Chung, did you want to add anything?
Firstly, I review what is populism, but populism is very difficult term, of course. But actually, in my paper, I view, for example, Trump or Moon Jae-in all has populist, kind of aspect in proceeding, this negotiation with North Korea. But I'm not denying, or I'm not saying Kim Jong-un does not care about his power, but I mean power, caring about power and being populist. I mean, being populist can go together. Is yeah. This is kind of basically my response, my reply to his comment. Yeah.
This is a very interesting topic, I think, and I think we can go for the next, I don't know how many hours discussing this and exchanging our views. I actually had one more question for Professor Kim, but I think he sort of answered my question in his last comments about populism and the role of populism in Kim Jong-un's decision and policymaking. So we will move on to the next subset of our session. But before we do that, I'd like to thank you very much, Dr. Chung and Dr. Kim, for your presentations and comments. We will now move on to Dr. Zellinger and Mr. Yeonho Kim. First, I'll turn to you, Dr. Zellinger, for your presentation or thoughts on your paper. I enjoyed reading your paper, Is Leapfrogging Possible in North Korea? North Korea's S&T Preoccupation, Foreign Policy, and Economic Development. Please take 3 minutes to walk us through the key arguments of your paper, including the meaning of leapfrogging.
Hello, everybody. Good morning, good evening. Very happy to be with you here and a little bit in awe when I saw also among the participants all the people, many of whom I read about or know. Well, my paper, the general topic of this conference, it's foreign policy and economic policy. And if you work with North Korea, if you read about North Korea, North Korean media, every day you read something about the absolute central value of science and technology. Today, for example, in KCNA, you read there was an exhibition of IT achievements from university students in this famous sci-tech complex, which they built in the Taedonggang. And not surprisingly, Kim Il-sung University took the first place among universities in the provinces. It was, among others, Pyongyang and Gangwon, the home of the leader, who took the lead. But it's really every day you find this mentioning. And also in my work in North Korea, and that is our work in training for North Koreans, but also our work in very practical work like afforestation. You are always confronted with this question, what is the best technology? You have I think we had a very appropriate online seminar on tourism with a representative of Bhutan, and the answer of our North Korean partners was Bhutan, very nice, but next time we want to hear about Germany and France and UK, about advanced countries. And the same is if you go down to a central tree nursery or to a small tree nursery in the countryside, and they say we want the most advanced of this or that technology. So that's a very, very important thing which always comes up. And that made me thinking about this relation of both. And actually, if you look into North Korean understanding of how the world works, they see the whole world or geopolitics as a competition for science and technology. For example, the Korean Academy of Social Science said this year, far from developing, a country ruins if it neglects science and technology. And they see the geopolitical competition of United States and China as a cutthroat competition over new science and technology. That's what the foreign ministry said last year. And they see developing science and technology to raise national prestige as well as the standard of living. And here we come to very high tech issues like, let's say, a new space agency, or very mundane issues like building a new hothouse. All need science and technology. Now, what is the relation to foreign policy? Once foreign policy supports the acquisition of science and technology, and also the acquisition of human resources, or the development of human resources. You see that, for example, how important in sending foreign students to foreign countries, how important the science and technology is there. That's, for example, in Germany, where I have figures for the first 10 years from 2002 to 2012, the German Academic Exchange Service sent out, or totally received, let's say, 80 students from North Korea, and half of them were in science and technology, plus some in medicine and botany. And there would have been a stronger impact if there were no curtails to this later through sanctions. And here we come to the second point. Sanctions clearly curtail the acquisition of new science and technology. And that means homemade science and technology sometimes has to substitute it. And the most famous example, you see it behind me, on that side behind me, CNC, the computer numerical control, which was something like building machines for cut and come for computer-aided manufacturing, which were able to manufacture, especially for the military sector, items which could not be bought anymore, centrifuges, for example. So that was very important. And here we come then to the next point. Clearly, in military development, science and technology plays an extraordinary role. And from the very beginning, for example, the nuclear program was a program of acquisition of foreign technology, Soviet technology, Chinese technology, Iranian technology, and this famous and notorious Dr. Khan from Pakistan, who sold them quite a lot of secrets there. So, and that is going on, though, again, it's also to some extent curtailed by the current sanctions regime. That is maybe the most. And now we come to the last part, that is the leapfrogging. Leapfrogging means that you can somehow overtake development of other countries by letting out some development stages which already have been done in other countries. Let's say like China didn't need to go through the credit card development phase because they already had they could use other technology which was more modern than using your cell phones for all your financial activities or transactions. In North Korea, I would call it, at least there is a, if it's a fetish maybe, or if that's too strong, at least a very naive belief that they could, through science and technology, save themselves. That's what I always say. We can, by science and technology, we solve the food crisis. By science and technology, we solve military crisis, and so on. So that's what I see. And then the last remark, really, I hope it was not too long. One thing is completely missing, that is the innovative spirit or the entrepreneurial spirit, which usually in Western societies or in South Korea is related to science and technology. It's rather always said the students have to acquire science and technology as a contribution to the goals of the party, as a contribution to bringing about a strong state, but not really seeing this innovative and creative space which is there. And that's, I think, one of the explanatory factors why, all in all, it didn't work very well for them.
Thank you for a synopsis of your paper, Dr. Zelliger. You provided a lot of great examples of North Korea's scientific and technological exchange and cooperation with various countries around the world, including Western countries like Germany, North Korea's attempts to acquire foreign technology, of course. But at the party plenary meeting in December 2022, Kim Jong-un publicly warned against depending on foreign technology. As someone who has spent years working with North Koreans, how are we to understand where North Korea stands on foreign science and technology?
You have to understand, North Koreans are very pragmatic. They can say one thing today and one tomorrow. And this warning was given in a very, very specific context, the subversion of the socialist system. But it didn't mean a wholesale rejection of foreign science and technology. And you see it when you see now the dealings with Russia, though as a layman, I don't know, unfortunately, I would have liked to sit in these talks, but obviously they asked for Russian help with some science and technology, drone development or whatever. Can only report what I read about that, but that seems quite understandable and quite realistic for me. Let's say it really did so. Clearly, foreign technology can be a symbol of domination, but I think they are, like most countries in their situation, quite pragmatic. If you see how they first brought in Orascom, for example, and now they try to crowd them out again and have their own system developed and have the conflict about the non-payment of or the valuation of profits of Orascom. So that shows, I think, that they have no problem with science and technology. And that was, by the way, already much longer in the past. If you go to, let's say, to old factories, you see companies from East Germany, from Russia, but also from the 1970s, when they had a short time access to foreign capital markets. They imported Siemens things, they imported Elim from Austria. I talk now about the power sector, and the same in other sectors. They were always quite good in buying what they needed. So, and they are very pragmatic about that.
Thank you for that,
Yes.
Dr. Zelliger. In your paper, you mentioned that after a brief ideological debate in the early days of Kim Jong-un's reign, the hardliners prevailed and all policy goals were subordinated to the development of the nuclear deterrent. If this is true, and I'm playing devil's advocate, how do we explain the series of economic reform initiatives that North Korea launched beginning in 2012?
First of all, 2012 was the year, what I meant, when there was this open debate. And then they become rather closed again. And we had these various phases. We talked about one today, the people's first phase. So I wouldn't totally subscribe to the interpretation, because if you see, our hope once was to say, okay, they built a nuclear deterrent, then they have enough of it, and then they can focus on the economy. But the contrary was true. They never developed so many different and costly military technologies, toys, goods, as in the current phase, where they have 9 or 10 completely different technologies they are working on. So this subordination to the military first, though in name it's long gone, is going on. And I think it will not go away also for a long time. So and there were certain reforms. Clearly, North Korea has no alternative economic system which they favor over the market. They see that the market is the best. And I didn't see any communists. I don't know anybody who read Marx or Engels there, or Lenin, or even Churchill ideology. They learn the most abridged version which they have to learn, and then they are pragmatic, basically. And the only point where they focus on is regime stability. And regime stability currently means military development more than economic development. So they have some reforms which are going on, and some do quite well. Let's say the small-scale service sector did improve clearly over the last 20 or 30 years, but the large reforms were partly withdrawn again, or were partly, like special economic zones, completely irrelevant. I mean, the special economic zone is a point I didn't mention before. We have a high-tech development zone, but all these are only zones in name. Nothing happened there ever.
Okay, I was going to ask you another question about leapfrogging, but I think I'll maybe swap the order because this is you mentioned some things I think that lead nicely into this question. So in your paper, you argue that the more serious problem than the lack of basic communication infrastructure is the North Korean leadership's reluctance to take the political risks. So I would like to ask you two questions related to that. First, do you see a genuine desire on Pyongyang's part to develop the civilian economy through scientific and technological advancements? Or do you think Pyongyang's efforts to advance science and technology are mostly aimed at advancing its nuclear and missile programs? My second question is, how do you think Pyongyang will attempt to reconcile its desire for S&T development with its official reluctance to rely on foreign technology?
I think you see it a little too narrow. If you look at science and technology for regime stability, it's not only the nuclear deterrent. It's, for example, cameras which you put on the border to China and sophisticated fences, etc. It's facial recognition systems which Kim Il-sung University works on, probably not so successful like the Chinese yet, but they certainly see a hope there. And that technology can help them then also a little bit to maybe enlarge the market, to have better functioning markets if they at the same time have a guarantee of stability. But the main problem of the market, again, it's not, I think, a problem of an inappropriate technology, but rather about the contents. And the contents control is very, very difficult. Even in COVID times, we saw an inflow of information on South Korean, on Squid Games or so, quite fast into the country, so that even the media make remarks on that. So everybody should have a knowledge about that. That was really amazing to think in such an isolated economy, still things go inside. And that's, I think, where the reluctance comes from, that they see with the foreign technology comes the foreign content. And that one has to be reduced or suppressed or controlled. And there are control technologies they are working on. The military is one part of that, but not only the military itself, but the civilian control technology is also very strong. And then I think North Korea leadership is rather cynical about the livelihood of people, but they have nothing against it. They would accept aid labeled as tribute. They would accept a standard of living which miraculously growing if it does not endanger in any way the regime stability, but it's not happening. And it's one thing that people who are economically more independent also tend to be politically more demanding. That's the one thing. That's why socialism controls the means of production. And that's really the political point where I see we have a border to these reforms. There will always be some trials, attempts, and then there has to be some steam let out of the, we say that in English, out of the pot or so, and then they have to put the lid on it again. And so that it will never be a smooth way of control or so, but it will be some more and less, but there will be no general decision to say, okay, we are opting now for a freer economy. That one North Korea cannot afford if it wants to have regime stability.
Thank you for that. My last question to you is I feel like you sort of answered this question already, but just to maybe clarify, North Korea launched a massive self-reliance campaign since the collapse of the Hanoi summit, particularly after the border closures in early 2020. How do you think this has impacted North Korea's science and technology development, or North Korea's prospects for leapfrogging?
First of all, generally negatively. If you see that for science and technology development, also for North Korean, international cooperation is very, very important. And we had just 2 days ago or 1 day ago, the new sanctions panel of expert report published, and you have numerous examples there how the sanctions inhibit this cooperation. And so then the internal direction after the Hanoi summit, which was under no circumstance cooperation with South Korea, no more South Korean money, even indirectly, also additionally inhibits them. For example, in some international organization where they still worked to some extent, sometimes directly or indirectly with South Korea together. So certainly that was a problem. COVID came together with that. That's another problem. And then you have these, clearly you have homegrown solutions. And while one or the other may actually work, you see what they talk about. They talk about people who start breeding new forms of rabbits or so. And these are big newspaper articles in their newspaper. And it's something, all stories which should show that the city and the province and the farm and the person has to fend for himself. And you saw these posters coming up before COVID. I mean, in 2019, basically, Gangwon province, the province of self-reliance or so, where it was suddenly put on that footing that they said self-reliance means we have no more funding from the center, which was something it didn't mean before necessarily. So it's just a poor substitute for cooperation. And I don't know how they want to come out of it. They have now, again, some more cooperation with China and Russia. Personally, I hope Europeans coming back now, next year maybe, with embassies and also with humanitarian work, which is so important because they are, again, on the brink of a very, very, very bad situation for the livelihood of people. But to come to a completely different situation without a different policy is not possible. So rather pessimistic on that.
Thank you, Dr. Zeliger. So now we will turn to Mr. Kim Yeon-ho for his comments on Dr. Zeliger's paper. So Mr. Yeon-ho Kim, please share in 2 minutes or so your key takeaways from Dr. Zeliger's arguments about leapfrogging and the implications science and technology have had on the North Korean economy.
Okay. Thank you, Rachel. I think this is a great paper on the history of North Korea's SNT development, as well as its collaborations with various countries. The historical perspective spans from North Korea's foundation to the present Kim Jong-un era, and drawing on his extensive knowledge and hands-on experience working with North Korea. I think Bernard delves into the intricate relationship between scientific research and international cooperation. And one noteworthy aspect of this paper is the examination of international sanctions and their influence on North Korea's SNT policy, exemplified by the development of endogenous CNC technology, as he briefly mentioned. I think the focus on leapfrogging in the context of North Korea's economic reform and foreign policy is an interesting angle that I think all students of North Korea should be encouraged to look into. I think this will help policymakers identify relevant areas for assistance to or collaboration with the North Koreans when the time comes for diplomatic engagement. I also very much enjoyed the paper's in-depth exploration of how Kim Jong-un's focus on SNT has expedited so-called digitalization without internet in North Korea. North Korea's 단번도약 or leapfrogging strategy primarily revolves around information technology, I think. As far as North Korea's leapfrogging strategy is concerned, the government places a strong emphasis on digital communications and finance, recognizing them as the areas with the greatest potential for progress. And lastly, the discourse of the new century industrial and educational revolutions, as well as the goal of making all people well-versed in SNT, 전민과학기술인재화, has significantly influenced changes in the educational system and operation of e-learning, believe it or not, in North Korea, or 원격 교육, they call it in Korean, in the Kim Jong-un era. It is one of the most intriguing transformations you can observe when examining Kim Jong-un's SNT policy. And yet, it's not widely discussed. So I was pleasantly surprised to discover Bernard's emphasis on this topic in his paper. Thank you.
I would like to circle back to Dr. Zelliger's argument about the impact financial technology has had on North Korea's informal economy, for example, cryptocurrency theft, but that North Korea's financial sector at home remains severely underdeveloped. What do you think about Dr. Zelliger's argument?
I think it will be valuable to explore North Korea's commitment to developing its own fintech, including mobile payment services on online shopping platforms and the introduction of cash cards. These efforts are underpinned by a supportive legal framework, as evidenced by North Korea's passage of the electronic payment law in 2021. I think it's evident that their fintech initiatives are primarily designed to control the flow of money as mandated by the electronic payment law. The government's focus has been predominantly directed towards mobilizing financial resources to meet the state's fiscal requirements, rather than addressing the financial needs of the citizens or promoting large-scale commercial and economic activities. And cash cards, by their nature, are not intended to offer credit to individuals as credit cards do. Instead, their purpose is to absorb foreign currency from households upfront through a prepaid system. And because of that, cash withdrawals are subject to specific limits in domestic currency. And this approach is consistent across the newly established provincial banks, 지방은행, which provide financial services such as deposits, money transfers, and cash card issuance to residents without offering loans. So loans are available instead only to state-run firms and factories with a strong credit history. And on top of that, when you consider the people's inherent mistrust in official financial institutions, I think it becomes evident that the government's vision for fintech faces a fundamental obstacle on the demand side. So although banks are increasingly accessible and having cash cards has become a symbol of wealth, people still rely on cash-based transactions and prefer informal financing and money transfers that bypass the government system. So the primary concern here is a large deposit would raise a red flag, leading security agencies to question the source of the funds and possibly confiscate them. So it's not an easy job for the North Korean government.
In his paper, Dr. Zelliger explained the role of diplomacy in advancing North Korea's science and technology, and that Pyongyang's ongoing diplomatic isolation hinders peaceful scientific and technology exchange. What are your thoughts on the correlation between North Korea's foreign or inter-Korean policy calculations and its S&T or economic development?
Well, I would say that we have some cases that show the correlations. So for example, the Kim Dae-jung administration and South Korean telecom providers explored the possibility of a telecom cooperation with the North in 2002, when the two Koreas discussed launching a CDMA network in the North Korean market. And this was initially supported by Kim Jong-il, but the project never took off because of Pyongyang's security concerns about South Korea controlling its telecom infrastructure. And U.S. also opposed based on international patent infringement and COCOM export restrictions under the Wassenaar Agreement. And I think it's worth noting that North Korea expressed interest in cooperating with South Korea on CDMA technology, while Luxley, that I think is a Thailand telecom company, was already offering mobile services in the Rajin-Sonbong Special Economic Zone under a 30-year license, with plans to expand these services to Pyongyang and Nampo. I think North Korea might have intended to let Luxley and South Korean providers compete each other against each other because Locksley was seemed to have been a little bit passive in its investments in North Korea. And what is also interesting is that North Korea bothered to approach and negotiate with the Egyptian telecom company Orascom, as Bernard mentioned. It was at the time when inter-Korean relations culminated in a summit meeting in October 2007. So I think one could argue that North Korea's primary focus at the time was on securing substantial investments rather than the mobile telecom project itself, all in pursuit of opening the doors to the strong and prosperous nation, 강성대국 initiative in 2012.
I asked Dr. Zeliger this question, but I'm going to ask you the same question. Do you see a genuine desire on Pyongyang's part to develop the civilian economy through science and technology, or do you think Pyongyang's efforts to advance science and technology are mostly aimed at advancing its nuclear and missile programs?
I think as far as their sincerity or commitment is concerned, I think yes. Based on my research on North Korea's long history of e-learning policy, I would say that Pyongyang is really committed to advancing its civilian economy through scientific and technological advancements. So it seems to me making all people well-versed in science and technology, 전민과학기술인재화, is a serious national goal to be rigorously followed up on, rather than just a mere propaganda slogan. So let me tell you a little bit more about their e-learning. So North Korea initiated its e-learning program in the early 2000s, believe it or not. And the commitment to this approach was exemplified by Kim Jong-il, his personal involvement. He provided on-site guidance up until just 2 months before his death. And he encouraged on the on-site guidance the use of SNT databases at e-libraries. And also a real-time online lectures were made available to factory workers through Kimcheok University of Technology as early as in 2007. And Kim Jong-un, he dramatically expanded the services by designating main universities as centers of online education in various fields, 학술 일원화. So that fields include machinery, light industry, construction, chemistry, and medicine, you name it. So the SNT database at the Science and Technology Complex, 과학기술전당, in Pyongyang is connected to e-libraries established by local governments and also science and technology distribution rooms, 과학기술 보급실, at factories and firms throughout the country. So this comprehensive system aims to close the educational gaps between different regions, schools, economic sectors, and production units. And last, COVID-19 pandemic, I think, confirmed the importance of advancing e-learning and accelerated the spread of the new information technology-based educational system.
That was a very insightful response there, Yan-Ho. And the reason I asked this question about, like, do you think North Korea is genuinely interested in advancing the civilian economy through science and technology is because I hear two very opposing views when it comes to North Korea's sincerity about developing the economy. One camp will tell you that North Korea never was interested in improving the economy, and some other people will tell you, the other side will tell you that there is or was genuine interest in developing the economy. But then with the collapse of the Hanoi summit, they went back to pre-2018 or pre-April 2018 to be more exact, when they made that switch from Pyongyang or parallel development of nuclear forces in the economy to concentrating everything on the economy. So with that, I think I'd like to turn back to Dr. Zeliger and see if he has any inputs or comebacks or responses to Yan-Ho's comments.
First of all, thank you very much for the comments, and it was very interesting and helpful to have some, especially also, I think I realized one thing when I a little rashly said no interest in developing the economy, we should talk about two things here. Naturally, Kang Song-dekok is there. They want a strong country and they want a strong economy, but that's not necessarily a better livelihood for people. We saw that in the Soviet Union. We saw that in many countries. We saw that in early North Korea. We had high growth rates, but practically no advances in consumption. So the consumptive sector is relatively neglected, and it doesn't play such a role, I think, especially of the broad masses. I don't talk now about the elites, which the leader needs for supporting his policy. So there was a lot more consumption for Pyongyang people, but for the broad masses, for the people living in the countryside, almost nothing. Just one more thing I have to get rid of that. If you think of the fintech sector and why are there problems in North Korea? Consider this situation. We were always in one of the 3 or 4 big hotels in Pyongyang, and there were small banks there. And one bank had this wonderful flowery name, the Bank of Martial Arts. And so I went there with my colleague and said, let's put, that was all before sanctions, I promise you, 2015 or something. I said, let's put 100 yuan into the Bank of Martial Arts. So we got a bank book, and the bank was there 1 year, 2 years, and then it disappeared. So they went away with our resources. Now, how can you have trust in a bank which suddenly disappears with your funds? I mean, in our case, it was a small fund. We just did it to get this bank book because it was so interesting. But that's one of the things. This non-trust of North Koreans into the banking sector has very good reasons. And also, as you said about the electronic payments, there are reasons. The main reasons you absolutely correctly said, it's control of the flow of foreign currency. But even our guides that time told us some story, which I, to some extent, believe. We always had really big difficulties to buy stuff in foreign currency because always they were lacking the small change. So usually you got back $1 and 50 euro cent and 3 chewing gums. And they said all of this disappears when you use these small cards. That was a very early cards they had. That was Nenara card or something, which was 10, 15 years ago. So there were really problems they wanted to solve with these things. But that showed rather the problem of their sector. And as for these debit cards or cards you bought, I have 2 or 3 of them and mostly couldn't use them because the card reader needed electricity, and that was often not in the places where they had theoretically the card reader there. So these are really the problems here. And then you look abroad and you see, I mean, tomorrow we talk about cyber sector, I think, but there you see they have the hackers and they have people studying fintech in other countries actually, and it's quite clear they want to bridge this gap, but it's very, very difficult.
Oh, did you have any comebacks or comments on Dr. Zelliger's response?
Well, the foreigners should be very, very careful about using bank cards in Pyongyang. That I would agree. But one quick thing, there are a lot of housing projects going on in North Korea. They reported almost every day. So whether it's really a long-term project that really focusing on improving people's lives there, that I think we need to be closely watching.
We have one question in the Q&A box from George, and this is the question. The issue of a possibility of switching resources from WMD development to people's livelihood was raised. How much would that amount to, and in what form? What is your estimate of the current percentage of expenses of state budget and share of GMP currently spent on nuclear and ballistic missile programs? This is a question for Dr. Zelliger.
Wow, I don't think I can answer this authoritatively because I don't have the data, and I think some of you might be in a better position to give clearer estimates on this. But certainly I mean, there's a great share. You cannot believe when they say, okay, they launched a missile and that amounts to 200 million US dollar. I think these calculations are very, very dubious for me, or questionable, because they calculate differently. And many of the costs we might calculate when we see how much these things cost in our countries might not be applicable at all to North Korea. But still, we can be very, very sure that a large part, for example, of foreign currency earnings go to the military. And these are partly maybe also consumptive. For example, the military purportedly gives their generals some allowance of a few $100 maybe a month, or that was at least a few years ago the case, etc. But most of that goes probably into weapons development, into hiring maybe foreign talent or buying things. So there would be giving that. I mean, we don't speak here of bringing North Koreans up to South Korean living standard. We're speaking of, for example, closing the gap in terms of food. This 1 million or 2 million tons of food they would import. And that is not so expensive. So I would be very, very confident. Would they spend only a part of what they spend on the military, on food imports, they could easily feed their population themselves, which they cannot do now. But don't expect any further figures from me.
We have another question. It would be fair to say that Pyongyang tilted away from the economic side of Pyongyang long before the summits with Trump, as they assessed their increased weapons testing would bring a tougher external environment. Given the geopolitical environment that the DPRK finds itself in, with both Russia and China more isolated from the West, is their current approach to economic management what we can expect for the next several years or decades?
So of course, I no doubt, I read all your comment on the webinar chatting room as well. And I also agree that no doubt fundamental advancement of North Korean economic agenda necessitates denuclearization. It will be wonderful, but we are not seeing that coming so soon. That is the problem, and then that is what I focused in my article. So for the foreseeable future, if North Korea make a decision to denuclearize, then it will be very wonderful, and then North Korean economy will leapfrog without doubt. But given the current status of the, you know, I mean, everything, I just feel like, as I mentioned earlier, North Korea is trying to kind of, managing its economy under self-reliance theme, and also with the help of China and Russia. And if there is any opportunity to have a negotiation with the US again, of course, I think there will be very, I mean, there can be another opportunity, of course, but for the time being, yeah, I think, yeah, just, but also Dr. Zeliger mentioned North Korean economy, North Korean authorities are developing, focusing a lot on science, technology, and then what is it, the light industry. So people's, consumer goods, for example, using market mechanism and using more autonomy of, enterprises, so anyway, trying to make the economy better as they can do, yeah, that is my answer.
Thank you. Dr. Zeliger, did you have anything to add?
Maybe a thought add to that. We shouldn't think that North Korea has very well thought out economic strategies. And I also don't think political strategies. If you look what they did, for example, with their currency in 2009, maybe even already under the involvement of the young leader coming up. And if you see how they now go from the attempt for full-scale embracement of cooperation with America and South Korea to a complete stop again in a very short time. I think we have here some form of muddling through. And we see that we don't have a 10-year plan, because I saw somewhere in the question, is it for the next years or decades? I don't think they have any plan for the next decades. Our politicians don't have either, by the way. But they will be very, very short term. They start closing embassies, and the most probable cause is that they simply don't have money for them. So they do very short-term answers now to a very, very serious situation, and we don't know how it develops. I don't think they have here this grand master plan, how it goes on, and their cooperation with Russia is there, and it's expedient, it's good for the moment. I mean, it's helpful for them, but I don't think it's because there's a great sympathy with Russia. It's simply because that's now the only chance they have. And if they had another chance, they would be very happy. So I would be very careful to see here some long lines in play or some master plan. It's probably just answering to political and economic pressures. Always under the lens, what will stabilize our regime most.
Okay, thank you for that. And I think we're 3 minutes over, and it's time to end our session. Please join us for our second session tomorrow to be moderated by Troy Stangarone, and we have some wonderful speakers and discussants lined up, 9:00 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time. So with that, Yanho, should I close, or would you like to say something before we?
For your excellent moderating. It's our first time to try this conversational format, but I think it was greatly done by your commitment and expertise. So thank you, Rachel, and we'll see everybody tomorrow morning again. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
Thank you.